Good morning. Hello. My name's Tim McKee, and I'm the CEO of the Olathe Chamber of Commerce. And I'd like to welcome you this morning as we are once again in quarantine here at the Olathe Chamber. I'm filming from my home. We are committed to try and bring information to you to help you through this tough time. And today we've got a wonderful presentation today from the individuals from the Kansas Department of Labor, which they will go over unemployment insurance and some programs in the Kansas Shared Work Program. Today, our program will be recorded. You will be muted, but please feel free to send questions in via the chat, and our presenters will try and answer those questions as we go along. So right now I'm going to introduce Natalie Bright, our lobbyist with Bright and Carpenter Consultants, and Natalie is going to introduce our presenters. Natalie?
Great, Tim. Thank you so much. We appreciate this opportunity. It's so important to be able to get this information out to our businesses in Olathe. So thank you so much for creating the platform. I would like to introduce our friends who are very engaged within the current unemployment system and trying to get things up and going. First that has joined us is Laurel Klein. She is actually the director of the unemployment insurance. She was promoted under Governor Kelly when she came in as governor. Laura was promoted to be the new unemployment director. Shawn Yancy has also been boots on the ground and helping. He's the chief of the unemployment insurance benefits. These two individuals have been spending a tremendous amount of time working through a very old mainframe system and trying to we went from having the lowest unemployment rates in record history to having some of the highest, having the highest volume claims of unemployment, literally within a 24-hour switch. So they really have been doing a great job trying to get us up and going. And I think they're gonna have some great answers for people who I think have been frustrated if they haven't been able to get through and talk to a live person. This is your opportunity to submit through chat. And then my really good friend, Phil Hayes, we were just reminiscing that we've spent 12 years working on the unemployment insurance system in Kansas. Back in 2008, when we experienced significant claims again and had a recession, Phil stepped in. I work with an HR community, and he stepped in and helped us rebuild this system and get it to be one of the healthiest in the country, which actually is good news for us because we are in a better state than maybe some others right now due to the health of our fund. So Phil is an employer. He also works, he is the vice president of the Arnold group down in Wichita, but he also is on the appeals board for the unemployment. So he really does see the vantage point from several different ways. So I'm gonna kick it off to Laurel first and let her get started. Thank you so much, Laurel, for joining me once again for one of these conferences. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Natalie, for having us here today. Very excited to have the opportunity to share all of this information with you. So Susie, if you want to go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint, we can just jump right in. I will warn all of you that I have to leave in the middle and hand things off to Shawn and Phil. I have to testify before the House, and they moved the testimony up just yesterday. They let us know. So this morning, we're going to go over unemployment insurance and the CARES Act to start with, and then we're going to move on to shared work. So you can go on to the next slide. You can go to the, okay, there we go. So I just wanted to give you the initial breakdown of where we are with unemployment insurance right now. As Natalie mentioned, overnight, we saw a shift from some of the lowest unemployment insurance that we had ever seen in history to now the highest claims numbers that we have seen. So these are the most recent numbers. That URL down at the bottom is where you can get that information on a weekly basis, and you can go back and look at prior weeks as well on our website to see what the claims numbers are looking like in the state of Kansas. So you can see this week we had initial claims. That's the initial application for unemployment insurance benefit was at 31,849, whereas a year ago it was at just about 1,200. So you can see that enormous increase over the year. That number is actually down. We peaked, we had 1 week where we had about 50,000, and the next week we had about 55,000 claims. initial claims. Important number for me to think about right now is continued claims, 92,969, just under 93,000 people in the state of Kansas that are filing weekly claims to receive unemployment insurance benefits. I never thought I would see numbers like this. You can see a year ago, we were at 7,600. So this is just unprecedented time in history that we're attempting to respond to. So if we can go to the next slide, then we have a graph on the next slide. Susie. There we go. So this can give you a visualization of kind of the spike that we saw with initial claims. So the yellow line is 2020. We were cruising along. Our average is the green line. 2019, of course, is the purple line. And the initial claims just spiked. And then you can see shortly after the continued claims just spike. And this graph does represent a rolling 4-week moving average. So it doesn't even show you the peak. Like this week, we have 92,000 claims, and the graph right now is only up to 60,000 because, again, it's that rolling peak. We'll be very interested when we're further down the road and in a better place in our economy to look back and analyze some of this data and how the pandemic affected our economy. Right now, we're just in the middle of it and trying to respond to everyone's needs the best we can. You can go to the next slide, Susie. So important to know, the Kansas legislature actually acted first to respond to the pandemic by passing an extension to unemployment insurance benefits. I'm sure as many of you know, unemployment insurance benefits in the state of Kansas was tied to the unemployment insurance rate. Since we had historically low unemployment insurance rate, we were at 16 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits. The legislature acted to expand that to 26 weeks for claims beginning on January 1st, 2020 through sometime in April 2021. And so we have officially, as of this week, implemented that extension of benefits. You may be receiving in the mail this week employer notices for claims that you've already responded to from earlier in 2020. That is because we had to do the redetermination, the recalculation for the 26 weeks versus the 16 weeks. If you did receive those duplicate employer notices, you can disregard those. Again, it was an automatic process and we could not pull them all back. So that's the reason for that. Other state legislation, the legislature did act to make the waiting week payable on the 3rd consecutive week of benefits. However, we also, Governor Kelly issued an executive order temporarily waiving the waiting week. That was in part so that Kansas could participate in some of the funding and programs through the CARES Act, which required that waiting week to be waived. So, and we have, I'm sure you've heard on the news about many of our technological struggles. One is around the waiting week. We had the programming in there. As Natalie mentioned, we're working on an old mainframe system in conjunction with some newer technology, and it makes everything difficult to do. I never thought when we were talking about waiving the waiting week that it would be anything but like a snap of the finger and then we're paying that out. It did not work like that. We're still having some problems. Earlier this week, we did a scan. There were still 520 claims that the waiting week had not paid out. We are actively working to fix that, reviewing code. We have, this mainframe was created in 1977, and we have code upon code upon code built from 1977 to 2020 that our team has to work with. And it's a challenge for them and frustrating for us, and I'm sure equally frustrating or more so frustrating for you. So, but we are working through it, and we've seen some major progress this week. The different pieces of legislation around the CARES Act for UI, could you go back to that slide, Susie? First is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. This would provide unemployment insurance benefits to those typically not entitled, self-employed, gig workers, etc. That program is not up and running. We are working to get it off the ground. The most important piece that I can tell folks that may qualify for this program is to go ahead and apply for regular unemployment insurance benefits, because in order to be eligible for PUA, you have to be ineligible for regular unemployment. So at this point, all folks can do is apply and get to that denial, but it's an important first step We'll be coming out with more information and a timeline about our implementation of the PUA program probably early next week. There's also emergency unemployment relief for governmental entities and nonprofit organizations. For our reimbursing employers, the federal government are providing a 50% tax credit that we are also working on implementing. It's for a limited time period from March of this year and March 13th of this year until December 31st. Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, or FPUC, is the additional $600 that was actually implemented yesterday. So now claimants, on top of their regular unemployment insurance benefits, are receiving an additional $600 that's paid by the federal government. We did have that started paying out yesterday. However, the back pay for the prior weeks will not be issued immediately. It will be in the next couple of weeks. Again, lots of mainframe programming to go through just to get those payments issued. Full federal funding of the first week of regular unemployment. That will help us shore up the trust fund a little bit by getting reimbursement from the federal government for that first week of unemployment insurance benefits. Emergency state staffing flexibility allows us to be able to hire. We have done something unique and coordinated with the other state agencies who have a lot of employees that are on administrative leave, deemed non-essential, that we have now borrowed from Department of Agriculture and Department of Commerce, and then within KDOL as well, to answer our phones in a triage contact center. So we haven't really fully utilized that program because we found what we believe to be a better solution. PEUC is a 13-week extension, federal extension for unemployment insurance benefits, which we have not yet implemented. Short-term compensation is the shared work program that Shawn and Phil are going to be talking about, along with grants for our short-term compensation programs. So you're going to see when Phil and Shawn talk to you about the shared work programs, just how useful those programs are. And so I think at this point, we can turn it right over to, well, I do want to point this information out because this is important. So that's our two different websites that we have where you can go to get more information. And then I know a lot of employers, everyone's having a hard time getting through to our contact center. We have this email box, kdol.uitax@ks.gov, that is available just to employers. I have my tax chief working that email box, getting the questions. If she doesn't have the answers, which she does have a lot of the answers, she will get your questions out to somebody who can answer those questions. And so I would encourage you to utilize that email box for all of your questions about unemployment insurance benefits. As I did say, I have to head out. Shawn here is the expert on our federal legislation. So I know when you all have questions about that, he will be able to answer those in detail. Phil is such a great advocate for the shared work program with the Kansas Department of Labor, and really appreciate him being here today. That's all for me. I'm gonna run over virtually to testify. And before the House, I want to thank you all for this opportunity to be with you today. Thank you just for all of the work that you're doing. These are incredibly trying times for all of us, and we're going to work together to get through these. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Laurel. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as Laurel said, I'm kind of a bigger person when it comes to the Q&A for those CARES Act federal programs and questions that you have. And really, as she also said, Phil is absolutely wonderful with regard to the shared work program and his knowledge. So I think we'll let Phil kind of walk you through the shared work program. And then as we have questions, we'll come back and I'll address those more on my end.
Thank you, Shawn and Laurel, for the great introduction. Certainly happy to be here today. I did just to point out, just so there's no confusion on the website, it is www.getkansasbenefits.gov. It's not .com. The .com is a phishing site. And so we certainly want to be mindful of that and not be in our private business standpoint of the .com, and definitely use the .gov. So we'll go ahead and jump in to the next slide here, Susie. And jumping into the shared work program, kind of the easiest and most concise way that I can say or summarize this program is kind of the tagline under the top of it there. It saves Kansas employers money and it saves employees jobs. And if there's not a better program in the state from an employer standpoint and how that transcends to our workforces, I don't know what that would be, because this is truly a win-win-win for Kansas employers, for employees, and then ultimately for our Kansas communities, because we keep our skilled workforces attached to the labor market. And so with this program not having, I guess, kind of being the hidden gem, not as many employers are aware of this program. So talking about being an advocate for this program, the more we can promote and share information on it, hopefully we have some positive outcomes and minimize the impact for some employers as an alternative to a traditional layoff. So when we kind of walk through the system here, I'm going to personalize the story a little bit about how the Arnold Group used this program in the 2008 recession and what we're doing this time around as well. We did get on the shared work program in 2009, January of 2009. We applied for the program. We were just kind of searching for answers and some relief and some mechanisms, and stumbled across the work share program and applied. Didn't know exactly what we were getting into. And it's, again, one of the best programs we did. We applied for an application for the 2009 calendar year. We reapplied in 2010, and then ultimately reapplied for 2011 and used it just sparingly at the front end of 11 before we came off of it. So as we walk through this, we seen our business decline, obviously in Wichita with the aerospace and the concerns with the 737 MAX and the downstream suppliers with that. So we were already seeing a slight contraction before the pandemic hit. And we were talking about, okay, do we look at layoffs to trim some of our payroll costs and so forth, or do we go back to the work share? And once we said it out loud, it made sense, 100% sense, just to automatically go to the work share. So instead of reducing our workforce by 4 or 5 jobs, just to help with some of the cost savings measures, we're all, I guess, participating from a team approach and how we move forward. So if you think about a traditional layoff, you minimize 20% or reduce your workforce by 20%. With an organization of 5 employees, you're going to let one person go. That one person, that workload gets spread out. You lose your training investment. You lose that talent. You lose a member of your work family. But a lot of organizations traditionally just immediately go to a layoff, potentially a furlough, depending on scenarios, and they're without knowledge of the shared work program. They may not be aware of a better alternative. So if we go to the next slide, and although the work share program allows for a minimum of 20% reduction and up to a 40% reduction, the illustrations in the slides here are really geared around the 20%. So some of the numbers can change if you maximize that program. Some of the questions I get too is the 20 or 40%, is it one or the other? And the answer is no. You can cut by 25% or 30%. So using the 20% reduction, again, we chose to cut hours. The program allows you to cut hours and not necessarily jobs. So certainly an opportunity to help manage business cycles, manage this extreme situation that we're all in with the pandemic. Again, allowing us to hang on to our skilled workforce, and it spares our team the hardship of the unemployment. And we're going to get to that where they're not managing the weekly claim process on their own. We're actually, from an organizational standpoint, we take that administrative burden. So in this case, again, we kept it simple. If you reduce 8 hours, whether you choose to cut a full day off, or in our case, we're doing 40% reductions. We've got employees that are, because they didn't necessarily sign up for this, we tried to allow from a scheduling standpoint what made sense for them. We built off time, and this is the beauty of the program. It gives you flexibility to not apply it across the board 100% the same manner to every single employee. So we got some employees that it made sense because of childcare arrangements and some other pockets of help, that they had either family or friends that had coverage windows that they could allow. And we built some of our scheduling around that. So that certainly was beneficial. But we've got employees that are off Thursdays and Fridays, and so they've built in a 4-day work weekend. Some are off Mondays and Tuesdays. We've got some that are off Fridays and Mondays. And then we've got a mix of people that will work half days each day. And so there's a lot of flexibility depending on how you need to respond and adjust to your customer demands and or your business cycle or your business processes. We strategically built our schedule that we have everybody in our office on Wednesdays, and that's when we do our company communications and kind of rally the team. But it serves as an opportunity to communicate more effectively for us. And then we've also got our management group scattered throughout the work share schedule too. So short from not cutting the jobs and just cutting hours, that translates into real dollars. When we ran the scenario and the cost estimation for us, we have 33 employees this time around. We certainly could have reduced headcount and saved some immediate dollars there. The program gives us flexibility for a 12-month plan or a program year. And we reduced, from a hard dollar standpoint, through a 12-month period, if we maximize the program usage, we would save about $154,000 in the 12-month period. So the dollars are certainly real. They transcend to the bottom line. But at the end of the day, it's part of our employee value proposition too. And if you've got good employees, just 2 months ago, it was difficult finding good employees. And here we are making tough decisions that if we have to let good, talented members of our teams go, that's a difficult position to be in. So again, the program is as flexible as you want to make it. I know the application is black and white, and you identify your participants, each affected unit, but there's a lot of flexibility once you get into the approval process and how you manage your time off with your employees. So, and just to give an example, I think our second week into it this year, we had, I think, 31 employees that were on the 40% reduction. We had one employee that ended up doing a 20% reduction just because we needed additional coverage. Then we had one employee that had 0% reduction in that week just based on the business demand and the responsibilities that she had to respond to during that week. So you do have some flexibility with that. We'll go ahead and advance to the next. One key point here is if you hire new employees down the road in your 12-month period, you can add those new employees to the program as you go as well. So I think there's some concern that I've engaged with business leaders that if we do it now, well, what if our demographics change? What if our workforce changes? The plan is extremely flexible. So I didn't want to not mention that. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide, Susie. How it works, just kind of going through a scenario here, looking at an employee with an average hourly rate of $15 an hour. The system, the workshare program, is formula driven. And so 40 hours is a metric that's within the system. So we'll use 40 hours times 15. The employee would earn $600 per week in gross wages. If you divide that out by 5 days a week, it'd be $120 a day. And so in the traditional layoff, that employee making the $15 an hour if they lose their job, based on how the formula is calculated to establish their weekly benefit amount, on average, this employee would be entitled or qualified for $360 a week. Every employee's weekly benefit amount is unique to them, and it's based off of their gross wages in the previous 12 reported months or 4 reported calendars. And I know, Shawn, if you want to jump in and give some clarification on that.
Yeah, so we calculate what we call a base period, and it's really the first 4 of the last 5 complete quarters. So if you think about it, that's the last 18 months. It's the first 12 of that 18-month period in most cases.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, with the illustration of the 20% reduction, again, you could have a 40% reduction, but so how I look at the unemployment system or traditional layoff, that's truly unemployment insurance. The Kansas Workshare program is the opposite of that. It's instead of unemployment, it's truly employment insurance, and that's a mechanism that provides an avenue or a mechanism to keep our employees attached to the workforce, maintains employment with them, but it also provides some economic relief for businesses as we go. So the 20% reduction, if they were, what their benefit, weekly benefit amount calculates out to, in this example, $360, 20% of that would be $72. That would be their daily partial weekly unemployment benefit in this example. So their earned wages get cut by 20%, 32 hours times 15 is $480, plus their weekly partial benefit of $72 would bring them to the $552. So when you think about 552 versus the 360, your employees are actually financially better than a full layoff as well. I know Laurel had mentioned the federal pandemic unemployment compensation. The weekly $600 boost is how it's classified in the CARES Act. So when you stack that on, which is available from March 29th through July 25th, that $600 in addition to the 552, these employees may actually be earning more on unemployment, which I think there's always been a myth historically that somebody could earn more on unemployment than working. And I would say that's not the case, but this would be a unique period of time for 13 weeks that it may very well prove to be true for some employees, depending on what their calculated weekly benefit amount is and what their earnings were for the base period calculation. And I know I've had multiple conversations with HR professionals and business owners. Philosophically, is that good? How is that possible, and why are we doing that? And the tough thing is that the feds had to react, and they applied a dollar amount, and they applied it across the entire U.S. So some of the coastal states, obviously cost of living is different than ours. Some unemployment systems allow for dependent benefit payout, et cetera. So there's a lot into it. Unfortunately, or fortunately for some, depending on how you look at it, with the crisis that we're in, any additional dollars to help stimulate our local economies is a good thing. So this happens to be kind of a byproduct of the work share piece of it. I think a lot of it may have initially been designed for traditional unemployment claimants, but how the bill was written, anybody that qualifies for a single dollar of unemployment insurance qualifies for the weekly federal boost. So do you have anything to add on that, Shawn?
No, not really. We do want to kind of stress that, for employers, if you have individuals who are, maybe they don't want to continue working because of the option to get that additional $600 and the experience of potentially more income than they might be accustomed to. But that's something we generally want to know about. If somebody voluntarily leaves work, for example, just to collect unemployment because of that $600, the federal government is saying that is to be considered fraud. So that's a big deal. We don't want to incentivize somebody taking unemployment over employment under any circumstances. So one of the benefits of shared work is that you still get to work, and your folks get to get that $600. So it's a win-win in that sense for shared work. But certainly that is a potential avenue for fraud that we want to keep an eye on, and it's something that will likely have to be something we get notified about by employers who are experiencing that.
Correct. And yeah, thanks for bringing that point up. That's been a focal point of a lot of organizations, is what do we do when somebody's being called back and they don't want to return because they don't want to jeopardize their enriched unemployment benefits. And DOL does have an option, several fraud reporting mechanisms on their website. And the info link that this presentation was built from has some active links in there, but there's mechanisms that employers can report that. We've certainly just taken a position and a stance that if a employee that we're calling back to work indicates that they would rather not jeopardize their unemployment benefits and they want to stay on the sidelines, we'll just let them know that we're obligated to report that as potential fraud, and we'll just pursue those measures. So we'll go ahead and proceed to the next slide. Does my company qualify? And just point of clarification here, it's not necessarily, this program is not just for private business. So when it says company, it's really organization, it's private business, it's nonprofits, it's reimbursing employers, so cities, counties, any municipalities are certainly able to partake in the system. Now, I say that with a few caveats. Number one, an organization must have an experience rating. Obviously, reimbursing employers, I'm not sure that they have true experience ratings based on the nature of the path that they're on, so that may not apply to them. But the second one, employers or organizations must not have a negative balance. And I think language matters here. It could say that you must have a positive balance, but that doesn't apply to reimbursing employers. So as long as a reimbursing employer is current on their tax payments, then they certainly wouldn't have a negative balance. And then the third caveat is cannot be delinquent on your tax reports or payments. So as long as you're current in good standing from your SUTA accounts, then this program is going to be available. And the last look, I want to say there's the vast majority of rated Kansas employers are eligible for participation in this program. So the employer requirements, this is another kind of a gray area that I get a lot of questions on is what's an effective unit? And I will tell you that the Department of Labor is not going to define this for you. This is another flexibility piece that I think is really open to what makes sense for each organization. For the Arnold Group, we have 6 brick and mortar offices throughout South Central Kansas. We essentially applied for a work share per location. So we divided it up by brick and mortar. Our corporate and administrative staff shares office with our Wichita operational staff, but we just submitted both corporate admin and Wichita ops all together on one application. Now, let's say we didn't have multiple locations and we're 33 employees. So this program is available for an employer with 2 employees or 2,000 employees or whatever the number is. The more applications that you submit, the more administrative programs you're going to have to manage in-house from an organizational standpoint. So, but let's say we didn't do brick and mortar and we just had all shared services in one location. At that point, we could have identified effective units as maybe a marketing group or a sales group or payroll or HR broadly, or shipping and receiving or production. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you want to set your program up. And the requirements are you at least have to identify a minimum of 2 people on each defined effective unit. Then the plan must apply to at least 10% of those. So if you have 2 people on it and 1 person, you're going to reduce hours 1 week, you meet that requirement because it's applying to 50% of the people. If you have 1,000 people on it or 100 or 10, you do the math, but the 10% caveat is at least 10% of that affected unit would need to be impacted. Reducing participants' normal weekly hours and wages by a minimum of 20 and a maximum of 40%. So again, it's not just 20 or 40. You can live in that middle range too, depending on the need. The nice thing with this program, when we applied, we kind of went worst case scenario and said, we expect that we're going to do a 40% reduction. And that set the parameter for our plans moving forward, but we still have flexibility that we can back some or all of our employees back to 20% reduction in some weeks. There's some employees that may not have a reduction in a given week, but we're still abiding by the program requirements that at least 10% of the employees in the affected unit. And Shawn, if I could maybe just ask you, is it 10% of your population per week on your weekly certification, or is it just 10% within your program year? It's going to impact at least some.
10% of the affected unit at the time of your plan.
Okay.
So for the year, yeah. So
theoretically, if the state reopens and in 6-8 weeks, then we could we'll still submit a weekly certification, but maybe all of our employees are 100% paid hours, 0% work share hours. But based on how we wanted to use the plan on the front end, that flexibility, I mean, that extreme exists. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, say it again, Phil. I apologize.
So if the economy does bounce back and we're to the point that workload and demand would allow for all of our employees to be 100% work hours, we would still submit our weekly certification and just report they all worked 40 hours, 0 decreased work share hours. And so the flexibility that what you define on the plan on the front end just sets the max parameter on how you would use it out of the gates.
Yeah.
Okay. Last two items here. Employer must continue to provide the same fringe benefits to all affected employees. So, and that's the goal of this program, is to keep your workforce attached to your organization, et cetera. The employer will certify the implementation of the shared work plan and the resulting reduction of the work hours in lieu of a layoff. So that's us just saying we're trying to do, we're trying to protect jobs. We're trying to minimize headcount loss. And so this is one measure that we're taking on the front end. Now, this doesn't preclude us that if the economy continues in a suppressed manner, that we still can't take additional layoff or additional action if needed. But this is an opportunity that hopefully we think this is short-lived, and it gives us flexibility to get through short-term or up to a year, or as I had indicated, our economic impact was felt for a little over 2 years when we initially did this from the 2008 recession. Next slide. How does this affect employees, or who's eligible? The tough thing is I don't think you can just across the board say everybody's going to be eligible for this program. As Shawn had indicated earlier, each employee has a base period calculation to determine what their eligibility is and what their weekly benefit amount is. If they recently re-entered the workforce and they didn't have wages in the last 18 months, then their calculation would result in a weekly benefit amount of 0. Therefore, they wouldn't necessarily be a qualifying participant. So I think employers should be mindful, if you think about defining your affected units and looking at your employees that are included, think about those employees that you've recently onboarded, and maybe there's a conversation to be had, what their previous work was. And ultimately this is a benefit that we're trying to protect job, reduce the financial impact on them. But if they're not eligible, then it may work against maybe some of that employee loyalty or morale messaging that we're trying to manage as well. So.
Hey Phil, quick question that came in, and I think it's timely. One is, what if you don't have an experience rating because you work with a PEO, so you're not an individual experience rating? And then the second is, how does WorkShare work or coordinate with the PPP plan that was passed by the federal government, Paycheck Protection Act?
Shawn, do you want to take the first one?
Yeah, it's funny. I saw that come up in the chat, and I emailed our shared work people to kind of verify. My thinking is it's not a problem, that it's going to flow back to whatever the experience account that you're attached to. So whatever that parent account is, it's going to link up to that. So I don't think it's a problem at all. But I emailed them to ask for clarification, and if I get that while we're on the call, I'll share that. If not, I'll probably shoot that to you, Natalie. And so you can send that out at that point.
That'd be great.
And as far as the PPP, Shawn, if you want to take that, I can certainly address it. This is one common question that I get encountered with as well, is employers don't want to jeopardize one program for another, and kind of what makes sense. And there's nothing within KDOL and the shared work program that would preclude any employer to participate in any other mechanisms. Obviously, when the Kansas Shared Work Program was born in 1989, PPP was not even a thought. So there's nothing precluding the impact that it would have. Is if you were approved for a PPP loan and you look at the measuring period and the metrics for the headcount as well as payroll dollars. Obviously, if you're participating in WorkShare, there's going to be less payroll dollars that you're allocating from what your initial formula was when you applied for your PPP. So that may slow your pace as far as how much payroll dollars you're allocating and how much loan forgiveness you may build toward at the conclusion of that measurement period. But it will help you in the respect of headcount. And the way I've looked at it from a PPP perspective, as we've applied as well, is if some of that isn't forgivable, it's a 1% loan, and it's we'll cross that bridge at that point. And we had those internal discussions, but it helps us on the head count, but it may limit or may not accelerate the amount of payroll dollars that we would have done if we just did the PPP.
Yeah, and bear in mind that if you're using PPP to pay your employees, if that pay results in them not hitting that 20 to 40% reduction, they're not going to be eligible for the weeks in which that's occurring for them, for shared work.
Correct. Just getting into back to the slides. I appreciate you jumping in, Natalie, with the questions. The employee eligibility, number one, this comes back to the fraud component too on the callback provisions, but really to be a good participant and to maintain the program standards, your employees must be available and accept all work offered by the participating employer for the claim period filed. And although we pay on a biweekly basis, the shared work certification is on a weekly basis because that's how that system is structured. So as long as your employees are taking the work that's offered and they're working those hours, then that's step one. Step two, must be available, able, and willing to work the hours available within the participating employer. Must be monetarily eligible for work UI benefits, again, going back to the calculation. And one thing to keep in mind is the employee may not receive benefits, as Shawn illustrated, if you use PPP dollars and you keep them whole and you get them up to that 40-hour work week, then if they're working more than the reduced hours specified in the plan, then they're not going to be eligible. So the CARES Act and just even qualifying for funds, I've had conversations with employers saying, how would this qualify? Somebody would qualify for a single hour of work. And I liken it to if a manufacturer is working 4/10s and maybe they pick up an 8-hour shift and they're normally scheduled at 48 hours, but they reduce everybody by whatever the percent is, and they reduce them down to 32 hours. Let's say that employee also had a secondary part-time job of working 10 hours. That 10 plus the 32 would put them at 42 paid work hours in a week. That would exclude them from receiving a weekly benefit amount because their earnings are greater than what that is. But let's say that secondary part-time job either went away or got reduced by 5 hours. And so you got your 32 hours with you and the 5 hours from their second employer. They've got 37 hours of paid work now. So that leaves them with a whole of 3 hours. So they would take that, if in the earlier example, I don't know what the dollar amount is. Maybe it's $9 an hour times those 3 hours. It would qualify them for a $27 benefit. So they would qualify additionally for the weekly boost in that manner. So and I talk about secondary employment, and you may be saying, well, that's great. We don't know what part-time job status employees have, but that's also a requirement that the administrator of your work share plan is you ask your employees if they have secondary work, and you have to report paid hours that you pay them, as well on the certification report, any paid hours outside of your employment. So we actually have an employee that works part-time for us. We track our hours and she reports in any additional hours that she may be paid elsewhere. So that's an important provision. But once you get approved and you get the weekly certification form, it really makes sense and it walks you through it with that. Shawn, do you have anything to add, or did I misspeak on any of that?
Nope, that was good.
Perfect. We'll go ahead and go to the next. Yes.
Hey, Phil, one more question that came in. Olathe is along the border of Missouri, Kansas. If an employee lives in Missouri, but the work is being done in Kansas, can they participate in the program?
Shawn? You have a Missouri employer, Kansas work, Kansas side?
No, Kansas employer, but the Missouri resides, or the worker resides in Missouri. So the business is based in Kansas, but the worker lives in Missouri.
Yeah, in that particular case, typically that employer is going to be reporting their wages to Kansas. So it's just like a regular unemployment claim. So as long as you have wages to entitle it in the state, you're going to be eligible for it. So as long as they were reported in Kansas, you could be part of their shared work plan in Kansas, regardless of the fact that you live in Missouri.
How do you apply? This has probably been the most popular questions is procedurally, what does this look like? What steps do I need to take as an employer to do this? It seems like it makes sense for us. The website, and again, these links aren't live here, and we'll make sure that we share the infographic that has the live links as well, Natalie, if you want to ensure that that's part of the distribution with the slides. But number one, you just complete the shared work application. And so if you Google DOL, KDOL, and you go to the main landing page, there's 6 blue boxes there. You click on the lower left one that says apply for shared work. Once you open that website, there's a big blue button at the very top that says work share application. Open that up, it'll launch a PDF, it's editable, you fill it in, print it out, you sign it, scan it, fax it in, and the work share division is, I would say, working overtime. I've heard lots of stories from colleagues that even if they've applied on a Friday, their approval is coming in next day on Saturday. So Sharon Kinsley and her team there has just been nothing but phenomenal in callbacks and responding to emails and assisting employers as they navigate through this process. But on average, I know statutorily it says that the department has up to 30 days for approval. They've been fast tracking every application that's been coming in for good reason, obviously. So I would say on average 1 to 3 days. Once you do receive your approval, that'll come by email. They'll give you some additional guidance, some next steps to complete. One of the attachments will be a weekly certification report. You'll get one for each approved affected unit or approved plan. And we just stage that out with all the employees and their socials for each week. And we'll just copy that, rename it, and send that in on a weekly basis. So while you're waiting on your application for approval, you can actually get a jump start on it and complete the layoff spreadsheet. Complete everything that's in there. It gives you very specific guidance, uppercase on some things, no punctuation, some dashes, some slashes, some without, depending. So definitely pay attention to that because it's an import file, and that's going to be critical to fast tracking you and minimizing interruptions. The last thing that you will not be able to complete on the spreadsheet until you get your approval letter is the very last column as far as how is this classified, and that instruction will come in that approval letter. Once you get the approval letter, you'll navigate to the Kansas Business Employer Portal through KDOL. You'll sign in. You'll select your spreadsheet. It'll import everybody in, and you hit send. It's a secure portal. It's really streamlined. So once you're approved, you'll get an employer flyer as well as an employee-related flyer that you can message and communicate to your employees. That's another question I get is part of the requirement is you have to notify your employees you're going to do this. Well, the process is just naturally built that the flyers are available on KDOL's website now under the shared work page, but they're also going to resend those same flyers with some highlighted information, key information to share with your employees. So you can do that on the front end as well as you start massaging your weekly schedules as well. One thing to note, this is really probably one of the bigger benefits for your employees if you participate in WorkShare versus the layoff. If you lay them off, they're going to get in line and with the masses. I think over the last 4 weeks, there's close to 190,000 new claims. Some of those numbers represent WorkShare participants, but this really streamlines the process. So once they're approved, your employees are going to receive a letter in the mail stating that they're entitled to a monetary benefit. Second page will outline the debit card or the prepaid bank card that the department utilizes for payment, but they don't have to use the debit card. So once you're approved, we just recommend that employees go out, create a UI account for them, register for it. And the only reason they need to have that is if they want to change their payment selection method from the payment card, pay card, to their direct deposit through their pre-identified financial account. I will say if they don't change to direct deposit, that first pay card will not be issued until it's first funded. So that may delay payment to somebody for 7 to 10 additional days. So we highly encouraged all of our employees to changed to direct deposit. The other thing, employees can go in then and look at their weekly claim status, so they can kind of see as claims begin to pay out and what their what monetary determination starts decreasing through the program year as well. And then the last step is just it's a weekly Monday morning activity for us. We complete and submit the weekly certification reports for each approved work unit and sign that, attest to it, and send that to Sharon and her team. And they do all the hard work. I say all the hard work. We're doing some by managing the hours worked and part-time hours, etc. That's why they're allowed to streamline the process a little bit for us, because we're helping with the workflow for them. So, Shawn, anything to add?
No, I mean, I think that was pretty detailed, pretty full.
Excellent. Next slide really is just some links, and these are active in the info link, so we'll get that out as well. All this information, if you just Google Kansas Department of Labor Shared Work Program, it'll take you to this plan. The application is at the top of the page. The employer and the employee flyers are at the very bottom of the page. A couple links there. And actually the bottom link there is the page that you would visit to have access to these documents. So with that, I'm at the end of my information. I know this is kind of when the questions start coming in. If Shawn, if you're available for a few.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, I have a couple that I've seen come in chat. One came to me directly. If we want to just kind of start there, and it might have been answered through the presentation, but the question was, what's the difference for regular UI and hours being reduced and shared work? There's a couple differences, at least on the workload side. The biggest difference is that is for your employees and what they will experience. So on shared work, if you followed the example that was in the infographic, and as Phil said, it'll be sent out. You know, on shared work, you can still earn more than your weekly benefit and still get a partial benefit. On regular UI, you can't do that. So if you're on regular UI and you earn more than what you're entitled to on a weekly amount, you're going to be ineligible for that week for any payment at all. So that's one of the probably the bigger pieces on shared work that at least your staff or your employees would notice a benefit from. On the employer side, I think Phil kind of filled it out pretty well in terms of the administrative work that's involved that's different from regular UI in terms of the weekly claim filing and so forth. So those, I think, are the primary differences. Phil, would you have any other differences between the two? That you...
Just from the employee perspective, I would say you're really fast tracking them and avoiding the frustration of getting in line if they're laid off and going traditional. Then they're going to be fighting in the phone queue in processing that. Really, I look at the shared work program as kind of fast tracking any benefit to your employees if there's going to be a negative consequence with reduced hours, or if you're looking at an alternative. So you're fast tracking that process for them, and we're essentially carrying the mantle and doing a lot of the legwork and the weekly claims filing on their behalf. So,
all right. I'm sorry, go ahead, Phil.
I was just going to jump to the next question. One that comes up a lot too is the additional $600 under the FPUC going to affect employers' experience ratings. And one of the benefit that, and I don't know if I mentioned earlier, for states that have a short-term compensation plan or a shared work plan, part of the CARES Act funding mechanisms allocated $100 million, what I consider kind of protecting our existing funds, which we've all paid in through our experience ratings, et cetera. The $600 kicker, Shawn, it's my understanding that that is covered by the feds, and that's not an impact on our fund other than they're using our fund to process the dollars, but essentially we'll be reimbursed for any of those allocated dollars. Is that correct?
That's correct. The $600 is not chargeable back to the employers because it's all federally funded and not trust fund funded effectively.
Okay. Second half of that question was, are unemployment benefits taxable? Both the FPUC as well as the state qualified benefits, and in Kansas they are. Every state has different approaches to this. Federal unemployment dollars are taxable across the board. Kansas are taxable. There is a tax consequence. We communicated that to our employees. There's a form that KDOL provides that employees can submit a tax withholding for that. It's a pretty clean form and a clean process. There's two options. Do you want federal withholdings? And if you do it, the amount is 10%. And the state option is if you elect in, it's a 3.5% withholding. So, and I know in visiting with some of my employees, they submitted that form. Those were put in a timely manner and taxes are being withheld. So, but yeah, certainly that's something we'd want to communicate.
Mhm.
Shawn, I'll throw this question to you. Can this program be used as a bridge to bring back currently furloughed employees?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you want to bring back employees to work and work them reduced hours within the parameters of shared work, you can absolutely do that.
Okay. What if somebody's already been collecting unemployment benefits and now we as the employer decide that we want to bring everybody back and jump on the work shared application and get approved and go down that road?
Yeah, you can definitely do that as well. There's one caveat that I do want to put out there. So when we entitle you to a benefit year, it's a benefit year and a total benefit amount, and that applies both to UI and shared work. They're the same pool of money, even though we're calling them different things. So if you have somebody who has, say, exhausted all of their UI benefits, bringing them back and putting them on work share, if they're within that same benefit year, they're not going to be getting weekly benefits on work share because they have no more money to draw. But as long as they have a balance, they can come back and take smaller increments of work share benefits from that unemployment as well. So yes, you can bring them back. You can get them back on work share, provided they have an outstanding balance that they could draw from.
Next question is, how does this apply to salaried employees? And how I've looked at this, obviously, you know, we've in the HR community, we've wrestled with kind of the Bermuda Triangle or the alphabet soup of competing federal and state regulation statutes. And from a salary perspective, essentially, if we've got salaried folks that are on work share, we've told them when you're on work share, do not check emails. I mean, if there's an emergency, we may have hopefully a sparingly phone call or a text that comes in, but when they're on work share, we're telling them not to engage in any work activity. Some employers have basically prevented or minimized the mobile access just to as another level of protection. But I think it's just being mindful and setting your structure up that if you're off, know that you're off, and we've scheduled the balance of our employees across the board to take care of any issues that come up during the day. One other thing, the question that I get is PTO or accrued time off, and are they required to do that first before you put them on work share? And really, this just comes down to how your policy is defined. And I've had some employers say we've mandated the use of use your PTO beforehand. Others say we're not. We're one that we didn't, because we know hopefully at the end of this, that work-life balance and the challenges of different things that come up are still going to be there. And so we didn't necessarily require the use of the PTO on the front end. Obviously, accrual rates are going to slow down just with the nature of the shared work and reduced work hours. So there's a little bit of give and take there as well. But I would just be consistent in how you manage that policy. And if you have a policy change and you're going to require that now, I would document a temporary policy to ensure that you have it documented and that you're going to apply it consistently. So, Shawn, as an independent contractor filing for unemployment compensation, you are denied. Do we supply the same information for the pandemic unemployment claim?
Not necessarily. So we're working out the details of what that application looks like right now. Generally, I think right now our plan is to take the information we already have from your unemployment application and then only supplement in the questions that we need to ask under the new program. So you can expect hopefully a smaller application for the pandemic unemployment assistance once it's up and running. But a lot of the information will be similar because, of course, they're still both unemployment programs.
Okay. The last question that's come in here is related to the kdul.ui tax@ks.gov email account. And I think that it was indicated that that should be really reserved for employers. I would be remiss if there weren't some creative employees that have found that site and are using that. But would you say that should be reserved specifically for employers, Shawn?
Yeah, we have avenues for claimants to get a hold of us more than we do employers. I will tell you that if an email does come in that is not an employer email, it's going to get routed to someone. But I don't want to encourage you to use that if you're not an employer. So if you're asking a benefits related question for a claimant or for something like that, I would try to contact us in the traditional ways that are available. And in this particular question, I want to be very careful here because in some cases, and depending upon what information is being asked of us, we're not necessarily going to be able to respond to a third party who is assisting a UI claimant. There are pretty strict confidentiality rules that over email are very hard to kind of walk the line of. So for example, if you were to call us and speak with one of our representatives, we would require that you provide contemporaneous consent on that phone call from the claimant in order for that third party to be able to discuss or assist or get any confidential information about your claim. So for those situations, email is probably not the strongest way forward unless that person can send the email themselves. And so if you can assist them in sending an email from their account and you do that on their behalf on that sense, that's probably okay. But otherwise, those folks are going to be better off to call and speak to somebody to provide, to do that kind of assistance in that way.
And real quick, one thing I don't think is really publicized enough is there's a virtual on hold when you call in. Don't hang up, but there's an option that a caller or a claimant can select a callback option and put their phone number in, and they don't have to stay on hold for hours at a time, or if that window is shrunk. That is still correct, Shawn? The virtual on hold?
Yeah, I think it's still active. I mean, obviously we've had a lot of phone volume and issues, so it may be spotty in its functionality on occasion, but as far as I know, it is still operational and it is still a viable option for folks to use.
Okay. And is there a better or an alternative email that maybe some of these people can pass on for a claimant?
I think the general email for a claimant would be kdol.uicc@ks.gov.
Okay.
That's going to be kind of an inbox to the contact center.
Okay. Next question here from Amy. On an earlier slide, it was noted that the waiting week was waived for full unemployment or traditional unemployment. Is the waiting week also waived for this program?
Yeah, because shared work is basically just a specially paid unemployment program. It's still covered under that same executive order for waiving it. So yeah, there's no waiting week for these claimants as well.
Okay. Does the state of Kansas provide interpretation services for non-English speaking claimants?
Yeah, we have a couple individuals at our contact center who speak various languages. Obviously, we have several Spanish speakers. It's a big language here in Kansas. We have at least one person who speaks 4 or 5 kind of East African languages that are of interest. For example, Southwest Kansas has a pretty sizable Somali population. And so we have an individual who can generally speak that language to provide those services. And if we don't, we do have access, so we do contract with a third-party company that we can call in, we can set up and have a translator there to assist and provide assistance as needed.
Okay. Natalie, do you have any other questions?
So there was one from the school district. Did you answer that one?
No.
It's from Lori Carpenter. She works for a school district. They're currently paying employees for their primary position, but many employees work or have additional responsibilities that get supplemental pay. if they aren't receiving that supplemental pay, would they be eligible for the partial UI benefits?
Not if they're getting paid for what would be considered full-time work. So in unemployment, we look at all of your employment and all of your income that you get from employment. If they're working less than full-time, we're going to look primarily at how much they're earning in a given week. And as long as it's on regular UI, as long as they're earning less than their weekly benefit amount, they could get a partial unemployment benefit that week. But if they're going to earn more than their weekly benefit amount from that particular pay, they would not be eligible for unemployment that week.
Another one came in here. What is an estimate of the administrative burden for employers to complete and submit the weekly spreadsheet? And I'll just answer from our perspective. Once we received the certification worksheets, the PDFs, we pre-populated those based on the employees that we submitted initially for each work group, staged those up, and that becomes our template. And within our timekeeping system, we run a report. We'll track hours worked as far as salaried people. We scheduled out our work share schedules for April, May, and June. And as we retire out of April, we're going to see where we stand and determine what July may look like. And even though we're managing it, if you put a process in place, I think it's relatively manageable, and it's not overly burdened. So we've got a couple of people that help with one aspect, and they funnel and scrub the data for us, and then that feeds up. And so I would say by this past Monday, maybe 20 minutes. And again, we're 33 employees. Obviously, if you have a higher number or more approved plans, then numbers are going to add additional time to that. So.
I don't think I see any more questions.
Well, Natalie, I think we might as well just wrap up. And Shawn, Phil, I want to thank you guys for answering all these questions and participating in this call today. I know Laurel had to jump off to go testify, but this is wonderful, great information for us. For all of you that are on the call, we will have this on our website. We're going to, and you can see in the chat, the link to our website. If you just go to our website, we have a page specifically, and I think it says coronavirus. You can just click on that and it goes in for resources in regard to it. And we'll have a link up. We should have this up sometime at the latest next week, but a link to this presentation and then all the information that was provided as well. So once again, thank you very, very much. And we are a resource, so please, if you have questions, reach out to us at any time. And thank you for being on the call. Thank you. Have a great day.